Okay, today we are talking about carbohydrates. This is the first of the three main sources of the calories in our diet. As we said, there are fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. 1 gram of carbohydrates, as you can see here, has 4 calories per gram. A gram of fat has 9 calories, and a gram of protein has 4 calories. Remember that vitamins and minerals are our micronutrients, not macronutrients, and they don't provide energy. Many people are nowadays on a low carb diet, thinking that carbohydrates make them fat, but they are wrong. The majority of calories on a healthy diet, because the nutrients that provide carbohydrates contain fibers, should come from carbohydrates. Alcohol also is another component on some people's diet. Not everybody drinks alcohol, and it's not necessary. It's not, if abused, obviously is unhealthy, and it yields 7 calories per gram. So carbohydrates should constitute the majority of calories in a well-balanced diet. What are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are a group of compounds that are made up of one or more sugar molecules. We abbreviate the carbohydrate as CHO, and that's short for carbohydrates, and then that's because for each atom of carbon we have one molecule of water, so H2O. Where do they come from? In our food supply, we get carbohydrates from foods like fruits, vegetables, milk, and legumes. Legumes like beans, for example, lentils. On our diet, we have mono carbohydrates, monosaccharides, for example, glucose, galactose, and fructose, and the disaccharides. A disaccharide is the simple sugar, the white sugar, and is made up of 2 sugar units. These other disaccharides are, for example, lactose, made of galactose and glucose. So carbo should be, as I said, a major component of a balanced diet. And all pyramid healthy food give carbo a central role in regulating health, simply because they help regulate your stomach and your intestine work. A diet is not considered healthy if it contains less than 50% of carbo. Obviously, carbohydrates should not be confused with the types of food, for example, chips or an excess of pasta and pizza. Those are not carbohydrates. When we talk about carbohydrates on a healthy diet, we talk about healthy food, and that where the majority of carbohydrates should come from on your diet. The monosaccharide, the most famous, is obviously glucose, because it circulates regularly in your blood. So whenever we eat carbohydrate, this carbohydrate has to be broken down on a simple glucose and then absorbed. Galactose is another monosaccharide, but doesn't occur freely in nature, but make up 1/2 of the molecule called milk sugar, that is lactose. Fructose is another monosaccharide, and is the major monosaccharide found, for example, in fruits, and is a component of the disaccharide sucrose, the white sugar, that is made of glucose plus fructose, because it's a disaccharide. Lactose is made, as I said, of glucose and galactose, and we do know that some people have lactose intolerance because they cannot digest this disaccharide lactose. They lack this enzyme, especially when they get older and they pass the age of 20. There is a lack of this enzyme, and so this results that the lactose remain in your intestine, and it starts to fermentate and give bowel problems and diarrhea. So for those people who has lactose intolerance, lactose should not be consumed, and sometimes they have problems if they drink milk or even they eat the yogurt. They don't have problem, for example, if they eat cheese, because on the process of making cheese, lactose is deprived from milk. Polysaccharides are long chain of glucose, such as starch is a component of grain, fibers on vegetables. When we talk about fibers, we talk about sort of polysaccharides that are not digested because they are undigestible by our body, but we need them in order to be healthy. And when we talk about polysaccharides, we also talk about starch, for example, in grain. Our body, our system is able to digest them, break it down to simple molecules. For example, maltose is composed of two molecules of glucose, and then absorbed. We also have another form of polysaccharides contained, for example, in meat, and it's the same kind of polysaccharides that we save in our body, that is called glycogen. Glycogen, humans tends to save it in liver and muscles, and whenever we have a diet that is lacking on glucose, our body has the capacity to break down glycogen and produce glucose. Glucose is essential for many cells, for example, brain, is essential for physical activity, is essential on a healthy diet, and we need, especially in adult, to introduce at least 130 grams of glucose per day. That might increase in pregnant or in people that are very active in terms of physical activity, and so they need more carbohydrates. So diets should not be deprived of carbohydrates, simply because otherwise our body has such a central role on glucose and needs to maintain such a level of glucose on our bloodstream that it starts to break down the reservoir, for example, the glycogen contained in our liver and in our muscles, in order to produce glucose and make it available to cells, and that is not correct. When the reserve of glucose, that is the glycogen, as I said, contained in muscles and liver, is broke down completely, then our body starts to break down fats and proteins, so lean body mass, in order to produce glucose. And that's another form of production of glucose that makes us understand that glucose is so essential for our health. So our diet should never be deprived of carbohydrates. That's where they should come from. Let's stay for one moment and talk about some sort of elements of foods that contain carbohydrates. So, for example, breads, pasta, rices, cereals. These are starchy food because they contain starch, that is a complex carbohydrates. Remember that complex carbohydrates have a longer time in order to be digested, so they don't increase too much the glucose level, and that's another problem. So if we eat too much simple carbohydrates, we have a problem of high level of glucose for a longer time that needs to be lowered down by the hormone insulin, and that hormone is also responsible of people getting obese because they are on simple carbohydrates diet. But if you eat carbohydrates with a lot of fibers, so all grain, sort of cereal, and you make sure that your diet has at least the 50% coming from carbohydrates, you won't have that kind of problem of high and down, up and down of a level of glucose in your bloodstream, and in that case you don't have the problem of getting obese. So the problem with obesity related to carbohydrates on the population right now is just related to the wrong kind of carbohydrates eaten by people. But if people eat the right kind of carbohydrates, they won't get that problem. So a healthy diet should contain at least 50% of the total calories coming from carbohydrates, and because carbohydrates are essential, because they make sure that the glucose level on the bloodstream stays stable. They provide a lot of vitamins and minerals, and also they give a lot of fiber. On this slide you can see the acceptable macronutrient distribution range. So as I said, 50%, but could range from 45 to 65%. In general, a person between the age of 1 to 50 needs to have at least 130 grams per day, but even more. It all depends, especially if they're lactating or they're pregnant or they are involved in a very long endurance physical activity. And this is the end of this lecture on carbohydrates.